Hello everyone. Today we will be doing a little tutorial on how to make a proper day and night cycle with a little extra part of darkening a cave along the way. I'm making this for my own game, and I saw some other tutorials, but they did have issues. Like the sun was still shining from under the ground, and it had these like backwards shadows and weird lighting and everything. So I managed to fix this for my own stuff, and I want to show you how in this tutorial. So I'll be putting on my VR headset to show you how it looks in action first. Just a second. There we go. So it starts dark. Some nice stars. There we go. As you can see, the shadows are moving properly. And it goes under again. Things are dark, the skybox is darkening. And it goes up again. It's also able to be paused if you pause the time, which is nice. Alright, so let's start with the code, shall we? So first thing you want to do is open your level blueprint. Well, if you already have a open your level blueprint anyway. This is my old event graph, and this is the new blank one we'll be working in. So first things first, to have a day and night cycle, it is important that you have a directional light actor, which is called the light source by default and is included by default in your project. You also need a skylight, this thing, and that's it actually. There's also the sky sphere, but if I remember correctly we don't really use it. Let me go check real quick. Skylight, light source. We do need it one time just to update the sun direction. So you will need a light source, skylight, and a sky sphere. Now, once you've opened your level blueprint, you want to go to this tab over here. Go back to there. And you want to drag those inside your level blueprint to make them available as variables. So now we go to sky sphere, and skylight. There we go. We won't be needing this stuff anymore now. Right, so we've got these. And the real code starts with an event begin play. So let's add that first. Event begin play. Oops, let's delete it from here. I'm keeping my old code here as a reference because this I just finished this yesterday. Anyway, so the code starts with an event begin play. After that, we want to make a timeline. So I called mine the day cycle. So So let's add timeline. Let's call this one day cycle. Then you can double click it to open it. Let's go to the old one. Alright, yeah. So what we want to do now is add a single flow track. Let's call it sun angle. We want this to loop as well, very important. So tick this little checkbox. Then we want to create two keys. So you right click, add key to curve float. You set the first one's time to 0 and value to 0. Then you add another one. You set its time to 1 and value to 360. It will be zoomed out a bit. It will be a bit hard to see. You also set the length of your stuff to 1. And let's check where our second thing went. Yeah, it's there. Alright, now if you go to our previous graph just to check. Yeah, that's alright. It's a bit zoomed out, but don't worry about it. If you go back to our new day cycle, you will see a sun angle output, which is very nice. So the thing is, when we start this timeline, we start via play, it will continually update and it will output a sun angle variable that you can use for our sun. But as you can see, this thing is only 1 second long, so I don't think you want your day to be only 1 second long, so we're going to dilate the time a bit. You can do this by placing a set play rate on the timer. So we get the timer, which is, I believe, in components, yeah. Day cycle, get it. Set play rate. There we go. So this is the first thing we do. Set the play rate. And for the play rate, we are going to define a new variable. Let's call it seconds in a day. I'm going to make it a float, compile. And what works well for testing, I found, is 30. So to hook this up, we are going to get this value. We're going to divide 1 by it. So we're going to get the inverse. So what happens now is that we divide the play rate by the amount of seconds in a day. So the play rate by default is 1 second. We divide it by 30, which means that it will go 30 times slower than 1 second, so a whole day will take 30 seconds. Alright, so after having done that, we can set it to play. Now every time it updates, we want to set our sun's rotation. Remember, the sun is a light source, so we are just going, let me check it real quick. Yep. What we are going to do is, every time it updates, set this actor's rotation. Now this is going to be its absolute world rotation, which works the best for me. Split these pins, and the only part of the rotation that's important is the pitch. All the other ones are not relevant for the day-night cycle. So we are going to link these two up, and it should update your sun's direction. Now what we also want to do is go to our sky sphere, and it was something like update sun direction, because the light source itself, it's just a light. The actual sun itself is in the sky sphere. Yeah. Anyway, this is important to get the actual sun to move. Now after this, what we're going to do is, yeah, oops. We are going to get this actor's rotation, and we're going to check if it's in, well, we are going to get the Y value, the pitch, and we're going to check if it's in range. With inclusive min, inclusive max, that's alright. Alright. Now this is the part where we're going to start making some variables. I'm going to make one sun transition lower bound and one called sun transition upper bound. We're going to plug this one in at the minimum, the upper bound at the maximum. And as for values to give them, I gave them -15 and -1. Found that these work well, but you can always play with those later and see what works best for you. So basically what we are trying to do here is check if the sun is currently going under or going up. And yeah, these angles just work because the sun actually goes from 0 to -90 to 0 to 90 and to 0 again. So that's why we're going to have to use these negative numbers. Anyway, so now we know when the sun is undergoing a transition. And what we're going to do then is, let's see what happens. We want to determine if it is currently night. So first, let's make a sequence. And do a flip-flop. Make a ball at night. And by default it will have to be on, because due to the way this timeline works, it will start at 0 and it will immediately go into night. So night will by default be true. And for our flip-flop, it's important that option A is setting it to false and option B is setting it to true. These values will work by default. If you change some things, you might have to change these things as well to get things working properly. Alright, so the idea is that every time we do a transition, it flip-flops between night and day. Problem is, all this code gets fired every single time it updates, so it would, every time, while this is true, while the sun is transitioning, it would continuously flicker between night and day. This is why I have these two do-once nodes in there. So you get one do-once node. but I found that one do once node is still not enough, so we need a second one. I need to wire it up when this is false. So another do once to reset the other. You can figure out the logic of this by yourself, but anyway, it makes sure we know that properly know when it's night or when it's day. So now that we know when it's supposed to be night and when it's supposed to be day, and when this transition happens, we can actually adjust the lighting based on night and day, which is what happens here. So we are going to make an if gate here out of the sequence. My apologies, there's a bug in Unreal Engine. I'll have to quickly exit and start it again. I've only had this happen with Unreal 4.27 before, no idea why, but it's so annoying. Yeah, for the people who wouldn't know by now, this is an Unreal Engine 4.27 tutorial. Should still work in older Unreal Engine versions, but yeah, don't go and try using this in Unity. Come on. There we go. Feeling a bit lazy today, so I might not edit out this part. If I do, you will never know. Alright, we're back again. Let's get back into our level blueprint. There we are. So we want to check with the if sequence, we want to check if it's currently night. Which remember we set here. Now when it's night, we are going to, whether or not it's night, we're going to do two things. We're going to make one function for nighting and one function for day lighting. Oops. Now as for these functions, we do want And we can just say, oh, oops. We can just say if night is true, we immediately switch over to night lighting, and if day is true, we immediately switch over to day lighting. But I want to have a little bit of a gradual transition that does not look so jarring. So we're going to add an input parameter. We're going to call it lerp alpha, which stands for linear interpolation alpha. I'm going to add these to both. There we go. So if it's night, we do night lighting. If it's day, we do day lighting. And as input for this lerp, we're going to want to normalize something to range. So we're going to go back to the actor rotation, to the sun rotation. We're going to normalize to range. And this should be the same bounds as with the in range stuff. Alright, sun transition lower bound and upper bound. So now what happens is we get our sun rotation. We know that it's in between the upper bound and the lower bound for transitioning from night to day. And what we're just going to do is map this value from 0 to 1. So when the sun is just setting, it should be 0, and when the sun has just set, it should be 1. And this is what we're going to feed into our lighting functions. Alright. Now let's start with the night lighting. I'm going to have this. Right. So in this part we are going to bring over our light source and our skylight. This is where we're going to start working with the skylight. Get light component. Get light component. Alright, now there are two things you want to set for bond, and that is one the color and the other the intensity. With the intensity being the most important, but I like having the color there as well. Alright, so we're going to set light color, set light intensity, color, set light intensity. There's also something else that you want to do, but I'm going to leave it until the end of this function. So keep your eyes peeled for that, because obviously I forgot the shadows, but I didn't forget them. I'm going to do them later. Alright, so what we want to do now is start lerping. Using our lerp alpha. Now first we want to lerp between colors, so lerp. I'm using lerp linear color, not using AHV, because HSV is apparently more intensive, but it's much more expensive than a regular lerp. Yeah. So I'm just using this, and it's giving good results, so I don't mind. So we're going to check in the alpha here. And we're going to pick two colors. So the first color will be the day color, and then it will lerp when it's getting darker and darker to the second color. So for the first color I picked this one. You can just pick it on here if you want. Second color, picking this one. And we're also going to lerp for the intensity. Just lerp, put it into the intensity. Alright, and this is where we're going to define another two variables. And these will be sun day intensity and sun night intensity. Intensity. And as good values for those, I'm going to pick 2.75 and 0. So during the day it will be 2.75, and during the night it will be exactly 0. So the reason I want to make this exactly 0 during the night is that otherwise, I believe, if you don't have a two-sided material, the light will leak from under the material and things will just look very bad. So make sure to just turn off your sun, set its intensity to 0, and also disable its shadows when it's night. But during the day it can be any value you want, of course. Alright, now that we've finished doing this for the sun, let's do exactly the same for the skylight. So we're also going to lerp this color. Now for people who don't know about the skylight is kind of like a filler light. So if you just use your sun, it will create very harsh pitch black shadows, but and it will look a bit weird. But I'm using the same colors here. But the skylight is sort of like a filler light, and that it fills in those shadows and everything else. And for example, when your sun is off, you still have your skylight to light everything around you. So this is what we'll primarily use to light up our night. To lerp again. If people don't know, lerp stands for linear interpolation. It just uses its alpha from 0 to 1 to go from value A to value B. It's very useful sometimes. So here as well we are going to make another two variables for the skylight, and I'm just going to call this one day intensity and night intensity. These ones I picked a value of 2 and 3, so it's actually going to be, the skylight itself is actually going to be brighter during the night, which is important because it will have no sun to provide the main light. So the intensity of 2, night intensity of 3. You can make this darker if you want, but it depends on what you want out of your night. Do you still want people to see everything but basically like in a blue tone like most games do it? Or do you really want it to be pitch black and require the player to have a light source? That's something up to you to design as a game designer. And you can then adjust these values accordingly. Alright, so for our night lighting we just achieved a smooth transition in color and intensity, but one thing that we also want to fix is to disable shadows from the sun. during the night, because otherwise it will just go through the floor and up in the sky, and it's such a mess. You really don't want this unless you have two-sided materials for your landscape, I guess. Now it was called set cast shadows. Yeah, set cast shadows. We're going to want this to off, but we don't want this to happen immediately, because when the transition to night starts, the sun will be about here somewhere. So if the sun is still here and suddenly the shadows are turned off, it will look a bit jarring. You want those shadows turned off right before the horizon here. So how I did this was a bit easy and cheeky, is I just say that my lerp alpha has to be above 0.9. So let's do that. Greater than 0.9. Remember, this got normalized to a range, so it will always be between 0 and 1. If that is true, disable the shadows. Alright, that is our night lighting function. Then we just need to do our daylighting function. So let's go to the old daylighting function. And you can see it's exactly the same, except we will also, so it will be pretty much exactly the same. And just copy paste this. Except some important differences. We will just immediately enable shadows. Yeah, that should work. That should work because when the sun comes up, it will be on this side. It will start from around here, which is above ground and enough to cast shadows already. So that should be fine. So we're going to set this to true. Move it up front. Make it the first thing we do when it is day. Going to connect this to here. But one important thing that I forgot to do is that for the daylighting we need to invert our lerp alpha. Otherwise, yeah, it's just due to the way that this stupid rotation works. It is important that you invert this. So you're going back to a cycle here. For here you do just minus. If you don't do this, things will totally work wrong. I don't remember exactly how it looked, but it will be totally wrong. So please do this. Alright, so we're going to go back to our daylighting. And for our daylighting, we will want to switch these things around. So we will switch from night, which will be A, to day, which will be B. So night, this is blue color. Day is this color. And yes, we're going to switch from night to day, so we're going to switch these two around. Same for here. To be honest, the color is only really important for the skylight, because we're going to be turning this off in the night anyway. But I decided maybe if you still want to leave a little bit on during the night for some reason, you can have it with the proper color. Alright, so remember, now we're lerping from night to day. So night has to be A, day has to be B. And alright, that should be all the lerping done. Let's see What do I have here? This is set to 30 seconds. Let's check if we've got everything. Yeah, this is some extra cave stuff. Well, you know, let's put on the old VR headset and see what happens now with our very basic light system. It isn't much, right? Just a second, putting on your headset. So as you can see, things seem to be working, but there was something strange going on with the initial light settings. So let's check. Sun should be coming from over there. Let's give it some time to come. So Skybox does not have stars in the evening. Well, that's not supposed to happen. I can see it's stuck over there. Let's wait a bit, see what happens now. It's probably going to continue getting stuck there until it's all the way back over there and do its whole loop again. Now, how did that happen? Yeah, that is not supposed to happen. Let's do a quick check on why that happened. We did set this to loop, right? Let's check. Length is 1. That's the issue. Our timeline is completely wrong. That's strange. How did the other timeline do it? One 360. That's weird. Might have been the play rate messing with things. This one didn't have any issues with that, so that's strange. Alright, let's try it again. Let's see if everything is disabled from here. Yeah, everything is disabled. Let's try it again. So the sun is setting. As you can see, things are initially weird with the lighting. This is what happens when the sun shines through the floor. You can see shadows, you can see weird light, and now things are as they should be. So this is the part that I left out intentionally. You will still need to initialize your sun settings, which we will do after we check that everything works. Nice, as you can see, it's dark outside, but still light enough to see stuff. Stars are nice. Sun is going at a nice pace. Shadows are great. And don't forget to set your shadows to something like epic or at least medium. If you set your shadows too low, there will be no shadows at all, so it will be a bit hard to check if you did your stuff right. So for the video I'm going to keep them on epic. Alright, so after clearing up that hiccup with the timeline, everything works except initially. So you need to initialize some stuff. And where do we initialize stuff? We do it in begin play. So ideally, we want to do this before we start our day cycle, because once we hit play, this will just keep looping and looping and looping and doing the code. So we want to initialize our stuff over here. And basically what we want to do is set the light, color, intensity and shadow settings. We basically want to do we want to set this to night lighting at first. So we can just copy over this stuff for night lighting to here. Alright. Now we can just do this instantaneously. We don't want to lerp anything. So we can remove all the lerp stuff. Set class shadows to false. And what we want to use is the night intensity. Skylight, we want to use a night intensity. Sun, we want to use a night intensity. And we want to use the night colors. Just quickly gonna check if I did everything correctly. Night intensity, shadows, sun intensity. What you also might want to do is just set things to night. So enable the night ball variable. Doesn't matter if you set the initial value correctly, it's just easier to do it like this. Initialize light values. When we initialize this, that also means that we can just mess with the sun setting, like in the preview port. So I can just set this to let's see, where is the intensity. We can just set this how high or low as we want. Let's go crazy and set this to 30 lux. We can do that. And once we hit play, we'll see that things will be reset to the state we want. As you can see, it's immediately night. There's no weird shadow issues. Skybox is slowly becoming dark or light again. Stars are disappearing, sun is coming up, shadows are working. And that is basically it. That's your basic day-night cycle. You can adjust the intensities, so you can adjust the lighting how much you want. You can adjust how long a day takes using the variables provided. But there is one little thing. This is very nice for an open world, but what, for example, if you want the player to be inside a dark cave? Now I've got a dark cave just here, and I think I hooked up something to make it work already. I think so. Did I do it? Probably not. No, I did not do it. So the thing is, This is not a dark cave. I can clearly see everything, and when the sun comes up, the skylight fills in all the dark spots to the point where this is not a dark cave at all. So if you also want to know how to make dark interiors for buildings or caves, you can keep following this tutorial. If you just wanted a nice day-night cycle, you can stop here. Alright, for those who are still with me, let's get on to it. Let's revert this back to, let's say, 3 lux. Alright, so the first thing we need to know is when are we inside a cave? And the easiest way to do this is to make the player go through a forced path, so I made a bit of a winding here to get inside the cave, and place 2 triggers in there. 2 trigger volumes, so I already made one here, cave lighten trigger and cave darken trigger. If you don't know how to place a trigger, it's pretty easy. You can just go to basic, box trigger. There we go, you've got a trigger. You can go to brush editing to easily edit it. If it wants to, well, it does not want to work with us. That's not an issue, you can always just scale it. You can set its extent. You can move it. Something like that. Make it something the player has to go through. Alright, anyway, we've got these 2 nice volumes. And we're going to use them inside our level blueprint. So we're going to, again, select one. Up, put this here. And just drag it in there. Same with the cave darken trigger, just drag it in there. By the way, make sure the settings for these triggers are set up correctly. I'm using some special VR trigger thing, but the important thing is it has to generate overlap events. And it has to overlap with the player character, which will probably be a pawn class. You can change those things here. Maybe overlap all, sounds like a pretty good thing. And make sure the player has the proper collision settings for that as well. Alright, so we've got our 2 volumes, and now we want to know when we are inside a cave. Now, how did I do that here? First things first, indeed, we want to know when the player overlaps it. Let's start with the darken trigger. Let's do a nice sequence here. Sequence. Bind event to on actor begin overlap. That's what we want to do. I want to do this first as well, do the second thing after. And let's see, just 2 events. So we do the same over here. Ah, damn it, UE4 is having the bug again. Just a second while I start things up again. Nice little animated background for your viewing pleasure. If it wants to animate. Of course it does not want to animate when I'm doing a video. Oh well. Apologies for the rather amateurish format, but this is my first tutorial after all. Alright, let's get back to that level blueprint. Just want to bind event to lab. Now we just need to bind the actual events to it. Remember, here I called those darken cave and lighten cave. So add custom event, darken cave, add custom event, lighten cave. Alright, now that we've done that, what we want to do is see if the actual player character overlap the volume. If it didn't, it will just lighten and darken stuff when a little bug flies through it or something. So we're going to catch, let's see, I pick the other actor. We're going to cast it to your player character class. I'm using one I called player character. You can just use whatever you called your pawn. Alright, so now we know that the player has stepped through the volume. So now we know we need to darken or lighten the cave. Now first thing we want to do is set if the player is inside the cave. Just so we can remember it easily. So in cave. So to darken the cave, that means you are inside the cave. So set it to true. If we want to lighten the cave, means we are outside of the cave, setting it to false. Now, just to make this work properly, we also do not want to we want to check this just. So check in cave if so just to make sure, if we are already in the cave, we do not want to darken the cave again. So we only want to enter the cave and darken it when we actually enter it, when we are not inside it. So we do the opposite when we want to leave the cave. So if we are already outside the cave, we can't leave it. So we can only do this if we are inside the cave when leaving it. Let's check if I did that correctly. Yes. If you don't do this, the triggers will do some annoying stuff and interrupt each other, and the lighting will be wrong again. Alright, so what we now want to do is we want to set the intensity of the light source and of the light sources. So I'm going to go back to night lighting. Alright, so what we want to do is set the intensity. We don't want to set the color this time, just the intensity. Set intensity. Set intensity. Now we've got to think about a bit about what we want to set these intensities to. So what I've got here is a whole setup with lerping, also to make the change gradual. Well, when you think about it, when we enter the cave, we want to gradually go from the initial lighting we had to the cave lighting. So when we enter the cave here, we want to make two new variables, and let's call it cave start intensity, make that a float, and cave sun start intensity. Those should be right, yeah. Alright, so let's set these. And we want to set these to the intensity of these components right when we entered the cave. So you can just do a get intensity. Same for the skylight. Alright, so now we know our start intensity. Now what I did here was to make it go gradually over time. I made another timeline, call it cave light fade timeline. So let's make one. Cave light fade timeline. And this one is a bit easier. We just we make a float track again. We'll call this alpha. And we're going to make this as long or as short as you like. I set this to, I think, maybe 1 for myself. We're going to add a key, 0, 0, and add another key, has to be value 1 at time, however long you want a transition to last. Alright, so now that we have that, we can start playing it. And every time it updates, it will set the intensity to a new thing. Now, what intensity do we want it to do? Well, we want it to go from the cave start intensity to the cave end intensity. So I'm going to do a blurb and make, we already have the start intensity. Now we just want the end intensity. Alright. And for the cave end intensity, usually want this to be pretty dark. So I set this to 0.01. It will be recognizably darker than the bugged stuff we had before. So we want, again, we want to use this alpha to go from the cave start intensity to the cave end intensity. This is for the skylight. As for the sun, we want to turn it off again. So, well, if you really want, you can make a variable for it, but I'm just going to set it to 0. So, cave sun start intensity goes to 0, because otherwise you will get this weird light leakage through the floor, as I mentioned. And let's see, that should be everything for our first function. Well done if you managed to keep up so far. Well, the thing is, what we are doing now is whenever the player enters this volume, he goes to darken the cave. But the thing is, right now, we are still updating our sun every frame, and whenever there's a transition, it will adjust the same parameters. It will call these functions, night lighting and day lighting, and it will pretty much override this thing we do over 2 seconds and then forget about. So what we want to do is, and what I did here, is we just want to check if you are in cave. If you are in a cave, we will not do any of this stuff. So the sun will still rotate, but will not change its light values. So that's what that's just what we're going to have to add to our stuff. So let's go to night lighting. Let's get our in cave. Check it, and if it's false, we can do our stuff. Go to day lighting, same stuff. Only do this if you are not inside the cave. Alright, with that out of the way, we can go and finish our lightening back to the original state, back to the outside lighting. And for that, what we are going to do is, well, we want to check if it's night outside. So we're going to make another if, because what we are going to do now is reset from the cave lighting to the outside lighting. But what the outside lighting is depends on if it's night. That's why we want to do our check night now. And what we are going to do now is define the cave return intensity. So cave return intensity and cave sun return intensity. And yeah, so we're going to want to set these. And now just think about this, to what do we want these things to return to? If it is night, we want these things to return to the night intensity. So we're going to plug in the night intensity, the sun night intensity. And if it's day, we want these things to return to the day intensities. Let's check if I got that right. Yeah, I got that right. Alright, what we then want to do is make another timer. We can just copy this one. Maybe move this stuff a bit further up. Because we want a nice and smooth transition again. Ah yes, I forgot to mention, you want to plug this into a play from start. So it resets every time you do you enter the volumes. Alright, and what we're doing now is basically the same as we did before. We set the intensities by lerping. Oh damn it, I forgot to plug this one in. Oops. Anyway, we do the same stuff. Every time it updates, we set the intensity of the skylight. And using the alpha, of course. To delete these. Now, what do we want to lerp from and to? We want to lerp from the cave end intensity, which is the current intensity we have. So, cave intensity. And yeah, for the sun, we're just going to lerp from 0. And we want to get back to the return intensity. Cave return intensity and cave sun return intensity. And that should be everything. Let's see. Just a quick check to make sure. Yep, everything should be working now. I'm going to show you how it looks in a minute. But one thing I can recommend is if you are having any issues getting this tutorial to work, I hardly recommend that you log the light source rotation and see what happens. I'm using a VR specific setup, but you can always just use print string if you are in a flat game. So what you're going to print is then this. So duration, not important. And maybe also print other stuff like if it's night, if you're inside a cave. Also printing the alpha helps a lot. Let's see, did I do the alpha correctly here? Yeah, I did that correctly. You can also always ask me, I'm always happy to help. Anyway, let's do our final test. Let's see if everything works. So this is what we have for code right now. There we go. Let's see if our lighting system is still working correctly. Our nice day-night cycle. Looks like the sun is slowly getting up. There we go. Shadows are still working correctly. Light is looking good. Yep, night is looking good as well. Stars will eventually... If you want these stars to look this nice, you will have to adjust the star intensity in your sky sphere. Or skylight, I don't remember which one. Anyway, let's quickly test out our cave. So you can see everything is very light. And boom, suddenly everything is really dark. I can't even see my hands. And let's stay inside the cave a bit. Wait for the sun to go out. You can see it's slowly getting night. It is night. And the lighting here does not change. It stays dark inside the cave. Now soon it will be light outside again. There we go, it's day. And again, the light inside the cave does not change at all. So this should be what you want. Now when we go outside again, you can see that light has returned to the level it was before. Well, maybe not. This is just a little bug that happens because things are going too fast. If you do this during a transition, it will screw things up, but this is only really an issue if you make your days as long as 30 seconds or something. If you make your days have a proper length, you won't have any issues with this code. So let's see, cave is darkening again, going outside. And as you can see, light is as it should be. So the sun will come up again, shadows, everything works. Whew, alright, that will be everything for, I guess, my first Unreal Engine 4 tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope it helped you get a nice day-night cycle working. If you have any suggestions or comments or anything, feel free to leave them on this video.